Imagine the chaotic playground of a primary school in the late 90s. The lunch bell rings and hundreds of kids scramble across the pavement in the 30-degree heat to find any available shade. They rip open their lunchboxes and immediately a pseudo-black market is established. Inside those plastic containers sits a rigid hierarchy of snacks that dictates your social standing for the next 45 minutes. A bruised piece of fruit is completely ignored, a generic Uncle Toby's muesli bar is tolerated, but pulling out a small, multi-pack bag of Smith's crinkle-cut chips instantly elevates your status. Having a packet of salt and vinegar or chicken makes you the undisputed king of the lunch bench, giving you the leverage to trade a few crinkle-cut chips for half a sandwich or a prime spot on the coveted handball court. This scenario played out across the country every single day for decades, cementing a deep, irrational emotional bond between the Australian public and a mass-produced potato snack. When you walk down the chip aisle of a Woolies, Coles or IGA today, the sheer volume of shelf space dedicated to the Smith's brand is visually staggering. The iconic red banner and blue diamond logo dominate the retail real estate, standing as a testament to a company that somehow managed to turn a basic agricultural root vegetable into a cornerstone of the national identity. The incredible thing about Smith's is trying to figure out exactly how they achieved this absolute market dominance. The snack food industry is notoriously unforgiving, with brands constantly rising and falling based on passing dietary trends, aggressive supermarket price wars, and a relentless influx of international competitors. Yet, Smith's has somehow maintained an iron grip on the Australian palate for over 90 years. Surviving that kind of retail chaos takes a lot more than just a decent recipe or a lucky break. This is the story of how a small operation packing potatoes by hand in the 1930s outsmarted the entire industry, evolving into a corporate juggernaut that completely monopolized the Australian lunchbox. In 1931, the Australian economy was collapsing under the weight of the Great Depression. Unemployment was skyrocketing and working-class families were strictly rationing their meals just to survive. Into this financial wasteland walked Frank Smith and George Ensor, two British entrepreneurs with a business plan that bordered on financial suicide. They intended to convince a strict meat and three-veg nation to part with their incredibly scarce pennies for tiny paper bags filled with cold, fried potatoes. It was an absurd gamble in a market completely devoid of commercial snack foods. The early days of the business relied entirely on grueling physical labor. Workers stood over blistering gas-fired pots in the stifling heat, frying sliced potatoes in small batches before meticulously packing them by hand. To season the snack, the company included a small twist of salt wrapped in a separate grease-proof sachet. The consumer was entirely responsible for flavoring the product, requiring them to vigorously shake the paper bag to distribute the salt. Selling for just 3 pence, the chips managed to generate a brief wave of curiosity, though sheer novelty was never going to sustain an unproven business through the worst economic depression in modern history. By 1932, the grand Australian experiment was bleeding cash and hurtling toward liquidation as the company officially fell into receivership. They were completely out of options until a group of corporate associates stepped in at the absolute final hour to inject just enough capital to keep the gas fires burning. That desperate financial lifeline gave Smiths the ability to quietly tread water for the remainder of the decade, buying them the exact amount of time they needed to finally catch the momentum of the post-war economic boom. Even with their financial survival secured, the actual product still had a glaring flaw. Shaking a paper bag with a tiny salt sachet usually left you with a handful of completely bland potatoes at the top and an overwhelming salt burn at the bottom. The fix came from halfway across the world in the 1950s when an Irish company named Tayto figured out how to bake artificial flavorings straight onto the potato. Smiths saw the potential, ditched the annoying blue sachet entirely, and dropped the chicken-flavored chip onto the Australian market in 1961. That completely rewired the national palate. Hitting the public with the heavy, savory dose of umami directly on the chip created an instant addiction, giving Smiths the exact momentum they needed to rapidly roll out the iconic original salt and vinegar and barbecue flavors. At the same time, they completely changed the physical architecture of the product by introducing the crinkle-cut. Those wavy ridges increased the surface area of the potato, allowing it to physically trap way more powdered seasoning for a ridiculously intense flavor profile. The corrugated design also reinforced the chip to stop it from turning into a bag of potato dust during shipping, guaranteeing a massive, satisfying crunch. By the late 90s, however, the Australian snack food market had exploded into a brutal battleground worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This sudden surge in profitability naturally drew the attention of global heavyweights looking for a piece of the action. The most dangerous threat to the crinkle-cut empire arrived in the form of Frito-Lay, the highly aggressive snack food division of the global beverage giant PepsiCo. PepsiCo had absolutely no intention of quietly sharing the supermarket shelves and immediately launched a highly funded offensive designed to shatter the fierce local loyalty to the Smiths diamond. Desperate to outmaneuver the dominant potato chip, Frito-Lay attempted a massive market pivot by pouring ridiculous advertising budgets into a supposedly healthier multi-grain snack called Sun Chips. Developed in the United States and manufactured from a blend of wheat, corn, rice, and oats, it was pitched as the sophisticated future of snacking. The entire campaign completely blew up in their faces. Supermarkets quickly reported that Sun Chips were aggressively bombing on the shelves due to an incredibly unusual texture and a bizarre flavor profile that totally alienated the local palate. Eventually though, Frito-Lay did manage to claw out a respectable slice of the market with their Thins brand. The Smiths empire though remained an impenetrable fortress. PepsiCo eventually realized that fighting a grinding war of attrition against a deeply entrenched cultural icon was a guaranteed money pit. They concluded that the only viable way to conquer the Australian lunchbox was to simply open their checkbook, resulting in the total acquisition of the Smiths Snack Food Company in 1998 after a series of complex corporate maneuvers. This massive buyout fundamentally rewired the entire Australian grocery landscape overnight. Armed with PepsiCo's essentially unlimited war chest and a hyper-optimized global supply chain, the strategy immediately shifted from fighting for market share to establishing an absolute monopoly over the savory snack category. If you walk into any major supermarket today, you're immediately greeted by a brilliantly executed illusion of choice. You can stand in front of the brightly lit shelves for 10 minutes, debating whether to grab Twisties, Burger Rings, Cheetos, Doritos, or a premium bag of Red Rock Deli chips. The hidden reality is that every single one of those distinct brands is manufactured, distributed, and aggressively marketed by the exact same corporate entity under the PepsiCo umbrella. This multi-brand ecosystem allows the company to trap customers within their own shifting tastes. When a shopper decides they've outgrown the classic crinkle cut and want something a bit more sophisticated for a weekend dinner party, they naturally reach for the dark, premium packaging of Red Rock Deli. They make this switch completely unaware that their money is flowing straight back into the exact same corporate bank account. Smiths serves as the reliable, everyday anchor of the portfolio, while the surrounding brands act as an invisible net perfectly designed to catch any Aussie attempting to stray from the core product. Keeping that entire multi-brand illusion alive requires a logistical machine with a terrifying level of efficiency. I mean, you can't just fry a few potatoes in a backyard shed and call it a day. The beating heart of the entire operation is their primary manufacturing facility in Tingalpa, Brisbane. Running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, this factory is a marvel of modern industrial food production. The numbers are genuinely mind-boggling. The Tingalpa floor processes roughly 320 tons of potatoes daily. Raw spuds are violently broken down by giant industrial peelers and fired into centrifugal slices where gravity and speed throw them against razor-sharp blades. From there, they drop directly into massive vats of boiling oil. The entire life cycle is astonishingly fast. Within a single hour of a dirt-covered potato being unloaded from a delivery truck, it's washed, sliced, fried, aggressively seasoned, sealed in a nitrogen-flushed bag and stacked onto a pallet destined for a supermarket shelf. Maintaining that pace requires an absolute guarantee of raw materials, making Smiths one of the largest buyers of agricultural produce in the country. They purchase over 110,000 tons of Australian potatoes every single year, a volume that equates to roughly 3,000 massive truckloads rolling up to their loading bays. The company locks down incredibly strict contracts with local farmers across 47 specific farming blocks, ranging from northern Queensland to southern Victoria. They employ dedicated agronomists who spend decades developing highly specific proprietary potato varieties. These tailored spuds are explicitly engineered to yield the exact starch content, dry matter, and physical dimensions required to survive the centrifugal slices without shattering. It's a rigidly controlled agricultural infrastructure designed to guarantee absolute consistency, ensuring that a bag of crinkle-cut chips bought in a remote roadhouse in Western Australia delivers the exact same crunch as a bag opened in the centre of Sydney. Being the biggest buyer of potatoes in the country gives you immense market power, but it also completely strips away your ability to pivot when the climate turns against you. A few years ago, the Australian potato industry was slammed by a severe shortage triggered by devastating floods and prolonged wet weather across the eastern seaboard. Entire crops were washed away in the mud, and the remaining harvest was heavily compromised. This agricultural disaster sent immediate shockwaves through the Tingalpa factory, threatening to grind the massive fryers to a total halt. To make matters worse, the global supply chain was fracturing at the exact same time, triggering a massive surge in demand for frozen chips. Suddenly, PepsiCo Australia found themselves dragged into a bitter, high-stakes war over raw potatoes as frozen chip manufacturers aggressively rushed the local market, driving the baseline price of a humble spud through the roof. Caught in this massive squeeze, Smiths was forced to open their wallets and pour tens of millions of dollars into upgrading their manufacturing capabilities just to survive the shortage. They invested heavily in state-of-the-art production lines in Adelaide and Queensland, desperate to minimize waste, maximize factory efficiency, and protect their precious profit margins from the soaring cost of raw ingredients. It was a brutal wake-up call that highlighted the hidden fragility of the snack food industry, proving that a single heavy week of rain in rural New South Wales can genuinely threaten the bottom line of a global multinational corporation. While a bad week of weather in rural New South Wales might threaten the physical supply chain, the marketing department back at corporate headquarters had to navigate an entirely different kind of headache. They were staring down a massive psychological puzzle dictated by the 80-20 rule, which essentially means the vast majority of Aussies will blindly default to their habitual favourites week after week. For Smiths, this translated to 80% of their revenue consistently rolling in from shoppers mindlessly grabbing the standard original salt and vinegar or chicken packets. This left executives with a serious dilemma. They had to figure out a way to keep a 90-year-old brand feeling fresh and culturally relevant, even when their own customer base flat out refused to change its buying habits. The answer they landed on was to completely weaponize nostalgia. For anyone growing up in Australia during the 1980s and 90s, afternoon television viewing was inevitably hijacked by the gobbledygook. This bizarre, frantically energetic alien creature was entirely obsessed with Smith's chips, and it rapidly mutated into a massive pop culture phenomenon with its iconic catchphrase. This created a brand association so powerful that it became permanently ingrained in the minds of an entire generation. So, when the company geared up to celebrate its 90th birthday in 2021, they knew exactly what to do.
Smith's chips remain as irresistible as ever. They've been bringing people together for 90 years. They're the special guest at birthdays. They're the MVP during the footy final. And they are a staple at every Aussie barbecue. Smith's, the original and the best. Oi! Smith's are for sharing!
They even resurrected cult classic flavors like tasty cheese and crispy bacon that had been banished from the shelves for years, tapping straight into the powerful memory of the primary school lunchbox and the feeling of being 10 years old on a hot Friday afternoon. While leaning heavily on the past effortlessly secured the loyalty of older demographics, the corporate team knew they desperately needed a strategy to court the next generation of snackers. Gen Z is famously skeptical of traditional corporate messaging, placing a massive premium on raw authenticity instead. Realizing that a screaming alien wouldn't resonate with this new crowd, Smiths aggressively pivoted their marketing budget directly into digital platforms like TikTok. But if you really want to understand how Smiths cuts through the white noise of the modern supermarket aisle, you have to look at their absolute mastery of flavor chaos. Starting in the late 2000s and accelerating wildly over the last decade, the company transformed the concept of the limited edition flavor into a highly contagious viral weapon. The marketing team came to a brilliant realization wherein they didn't actually need to invent a new flavor that tasted genuinely good, and simply needed to invent a flavor that people physically couldn't stop talking about. This strategy birthed some of the most baffling culinary experiments in Australian retail history. During their interactive Do Us a Flavor campaigns, they unleashed chips tasting like Caesar salad, buttered popcorn, barbecue coat of arms, and a late-night kebab. They even partnered with Bega to create a Vegemite chip, an incredibly divisive move that instantly sparked fierce national debates across social media over whether the iconic breakfast spread belonged anywhere near a deep fryer. The absolute zenith of this marketing madness arrived in 2020 with the release of the Lamington flavored chip. The mere concept of combining fried, salty potatoes with the sweet taste of chocolate, coconut, and jam was inherently repulsive to a massive portion of the population. But in reality, the Lamington chip was an unmitigated marketing triumph. It was never designed to permanently replace salt and vinegar on the shelves, and instead, the entire launch was engineered specifically to generate millions of dollars in free public relations. Every single angry tweet, every disgusted video review, and every baffled news segment essentially functioned as a free billboard featuring the Smiths logo front and center. Sheer morbid curiosity drove thousands of people to buy a bag just to see how awful it actually tasted, forcing people to actively engage with the Smiths brand and keeping it at the front of their minds right before they inevitably reached for their usual reliable packet of chicken chips. But a brilliant marketing playbook offers zero protection against an economic downturn, and operating at the absolute top of the retail food chain naturally paints a massive target on your back. As the cost of living crisis began to severely squeeze Australian households, the humble potato chip suddenly became a lightning rod for public frustration when the price of a standard bag of Smiths skyrocketed seemingly overnight. Aussies walking into their local servos were left completely baffled by an $8 price tag on a snack that previously cost loose change. This extreme pricing friction collided with the rapid rise of Aldi and their heavily discounted home brand grocery lines. The tension finally snapped thanks to a bizarre conspiracy theory. A Redditor buying Aldi's budget tier Sprinters chips was shocked when they opened the cardboard and found a sealed, fully branded bag of Smith's original chips sitting right there. The internet immediately connected the dots. Shoppers realized that the massive Tingalpa factory in Brisbane was running the exact same potatoes through the exact same industrial fryers to produce the budget Aldi brand, which was sitting on shelves for less than half the price of the premium product. This accidental revelation forced the Australian public to confront a rather uncomfortable reality that they were paying a massive, unjustified premium entirely for a glossy cardboard box and an iconic blue diamond logo. Yet, despite this supply chain secret being widely publicized and fiercely debated on national platforms, the sales figures for the premium Smiths product remained remarkably stable. The psychological comfort of buying a brand you've trusted since childhood actively overrides the logical desire to save $3 on a generic alternative. The Australian consumer essentially proved they're perfectly willing to pay a premium tax just for the familiarity of the packaging. The corporate executives rely heavily on this deep-seated, almost irrational loyalty to survive the endless waves of negative press surrounding shrinkflation. Just take a look at this clip.
Let's do Smith. I want to do Smith because it kind of reminds me of Lay's chips. Is it Lay's chips? Just a different brand?
No, I didn't know this, but in Australia we recently got Lay's, and so it's just a direct competitor. Show chat the chip.
Dude, what the hell? Why are there no chips in there? So much air.
Yeah, you've been scammed.
So what is this? Dude, come on, Australia, do better.
It makes you wonder how they can get away with this. But walk into any 7-Eleven or Ampol at 5 in the morning and you'll still see tradies happily slapping down top dollar for salt and vinegar chips alongside their coffee. The pricing structure defies logic, but Smith's effortlessly weathers the PR storms because they know consumer anger evaporates the second people crave that irreplaceable crinkle-cut crunch. From a desperate Great Depression gamble to a massive global conglomerate, Smith's remains an immovable cultural artifact. They run a ruthless logistical empire perfectly hidden behind the illusion of a friendly neighborhood brand. By knowing exactly when to lean on their core flavors and when to toss a Lamington flavored grenade into the public discourse, Smith's ensured no competitor could touch them. People love complaining about the price and the packaging, but they always buy the product. So, with all that said, are you fiercely loyal to the classic salt and vinegar, or did you brave the Vegemite and Lamington experiments? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below, and let us know the most red-hot chip flavor you've ever found on the shelf. I really enjoy reading all the comments, except for maybe the AI accusation ones, so do make sure to leave your thoughts down below. But anyways, if you enjoy our deep dives into business history, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a video. Anyways guys, thanks for watching and stay curious.